My in-laws banned my child from dinner for being 5 minutes late, while their golden grandchild showed up hours late and got applause. I reminded them who planned every family event. I was standing in the doorway of my in-laws' dining room at 6:05 p.m. on a Sunday evening, watching my 9-year-old son Owen sit on the stairs in the entryway, banished from the family dinner table for arriving 5 minutes late due to his soccer game running long. My father-in-law, Gerald, stood over him with his arms crossed, delivering a lecture about punctuality and respect for other people's time, his voice carrying that stern disappointment he usually reserved for discussing politics or complaining about his property taxes. Owen's eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders hunched forward in that defeated posture kids get when they've been shamed by adults who should know better. My hands were gripping the doorframe so tightly I could feel the wood grain pressing into my palms, and behind me in the dining room I could hear my mother-in-law Donna setting the table, commenting brightly about how lovely it was that everyone who mattered was here on time. Everyone who mattered. Those words hung in the air like poison, and I felt something fundamental crack inside me when, exactly 43 minutes later, the front door burst open and my wife's brother Jordan walked in with his 11-year-old son Ethan, both of them laughing about traffic and completely unapologetic about missing the scheduled start time by nearly an hour. And Gerald, that same man who just banned my son from dinner for being 5 minutes late, broke into a huge smile and said, "There's my boy, come on in, we saved you the best seats." I'd been married to Melissa for 12 years when that moment arrived, together for 14 total, and for most of that time I'd managed the delicate dance of maintaining peace with my in-laws while quietly absorbing their subtle and not-so-subtle favoritism toward Jordan's family. Gerald and Donna lived in a sprawling house in an upscale suburb about 30 minutes from us, and family dinners happened every other Sunday like clockwork, a tradition that predated my arrival in the family by decades. I was a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm, organized and detail-oriented by nature, and somewhere along the way, I'd become the de facto coordinator for every family gathering. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, graduations, I handled the logistics. I booked venues, coordinated catering, managed RSVPs, created schedules, arranged transportation for elderly relatives, ordered cakes, bought gifts on behalf of the family, kept spreadsheets of dietary restrictions and preferences. It had started small, maybe 6 years into my marriage, when I'd offered to help plan Gerald's 60th birthday party because Melissa was swamped at work. The party had been a success, people complimented the organization, and suddenly, I was the family event guy. I didn't mind initially. I liked planning, liked the satisfaction of pulling off a complex event smoothly, liked feeling useful and valued. Over the years, I'd coordinated probably 30 major family events, everything from intimate dinners to massive holiday gatherings with 40-plus relatives. I kept detailed records in a system of spreadsheets and files, vendor contacts, budget breakdowns, timelines, seating charts, gift lists. The family had come to expect it, to rely on it, to take it completely for granted. Gerald would mention wanting to celebrate something, and I'd already be mentally organizing the logistics. Donna would express a vision for Christmas dinner, and I'd be sourcing rentals and coordinating with caterers before she finished describing it. Jordan and his wife, Christina, showed up to events I'd planned and enjoyed themselves without once asking about the work involved. And through it all, the subtle favoritism toward Ethan over Owen had been building, a slow accumulation of small cuts that I'd rationalized as personality differences or my own sensitivity. The first real warning sign had come about 3 years earlier, during a family photo session I'd organized for Gerald and Donna's 40th anniversary. I'd hired a professional photographer, scouted locations, coordinated outfits so everyone would complement each other without matching too obviously, created a shot list of different family combinations. The photographer, a talented woman named Lisa Townsend, who'd been shooting family portraits for 18 years, had arranged everyone for the main group shot. She'd positioned Ethan and Owen front and center between their grandparents, the beloved grandchildren flanking Gerald and Donna. The shot was perfect, both boys smiling, the late afternoon light golden and soft. But before Lisa could take the photo, Donna had asked if we could move Owen to the side because Ethan's smile was so photogenic and she wanted him more central. I'd felt my stomach drop, glanced at Melissa who looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Lisa had given me a questioning look, and I'd just nodded, and she'd repositioned everyone with Ethan directly in front of Gerald and Owen shifted to the far left edge. When we got the final photos back, Owen was barely visible in most of the main family shots, turned slightly away from the camera, his face partially obscured by another relative's shoulder. I'd brought it up to Melissa that night, asking if she'd noticed how her mother had specifically moved Owen out of the center for the photos. Melissa had sighed and said her mom probably just wanted Ethan front and center because he was older and taller, that I was reading too much into it. I'd asked why being older and taller meant he deserved the better position, and Melissa had gotten defensive, said her parents loved both boys equally, and I was creating problems where none existed. I'd backed down because I didn't want to fight, but I'd kept the photos in a file on my computer, a strange instinct to document something that felt fundamentally wrong. Over the following 3 years, the pattern had intensified in ways that became harder to dismiss or rationalize. At birthday celebrations, Ethan received elaborate gifts and extensive praise, while Owen got perfunctory presents and brief acknowledgement. During holiday gatherings, Ethan's achievements in school or sports would be announced and celebrated with toasts and applause, while Owen's accomplishments went unmentioned even when I specifically brought them up. When both boys did something wrong, Ethan's misbehavior was dismissed as boyish energy or creativity, while Owen's identical behavior was met with stern correction and consequences. I started documenting it all, not consciously building a case at first, but just trying to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining the differential treatment. I kept notes in my phone with dates and specific incidents. I had photos from events showing the physical positioning of the boys, Ethan always front and center, Owen always on the periphery. I had videos from various gatherings where you could hear the tonal difference in how Gerald and Donna spoke to each child. The Sunday dinner incident was the breaking point, the moment where the favoritism became so blatant that even Melissa couldn't rationalize it away. We'd been running late because Owen's soccer game had gone into overtime, a close match that his team ultimately won with Owen scoring the tying goal. We'd texted Gerald and Donna at 5:48 p.m., 12 minutes before the scheduled 6 p.m. dinner start, explaining we'd be about 10 minutes late due to the game running long. Gerald had responded tersely. Dinner starts at 6 sharp. I'd pushed the speed limit getting there. We'd rushed through the door at 6:05 p.m., and before we could even apologize or explain about the winning goal, Gerald had told Owen to sit on the stairs, that he wouldn't be joining dinner because he couldn't respect other people's time. Owen had been confused and hurt, looking to me to fix it, and I'd started to explain about the game when Gerald cut me off and said excuses don't change the fact that we were late, that punctuality was a character issue, and Owen needed to learn this lesson. I'd felt my face go hot with anger, but Melissa had touched my arm, a silent plea to not cause a scene, and I'd swallowed the fury and told Owen to sit on the stairs, that we'd figure this out. Owen had complied without argument because he was a good kid who'd been trained not to talk back to adults, and I'd watched him sink onto the third step with his shoulders hunched and his hands clasped between his knees. Gerald had then turned to the rest of us and suggested we begin dinner, that we shouldn't let one person's tardiness disrupt everyone else's meal. I'd stood there stunned, struggling to process that my son was being excluded from a family dinner for being 5 minutes late to an informal Sunday gathering. Not a formal event, not a reservation with time constraints, just family dinner at a house where people routinely wandered in and out of the kitchen for hours. The disproportionate punishment made no sense until Jordan arrived. When Jordan and Ethan walked in at 6:48 p.m., 48 minutes after the scheduled start time, and 43 minutes after Owen had been banished to the stairs, the contrast in reactions was so stark, it felt like a physical blow. Gerald's stern, disapproving expression transformed into delighted welcome. He asked about traffic like it was a fascinating topic, told them to come sit down, said Donna had kept their portions warm in the oven. Donna fussed over Ethan, asking if he wanted something to drink, offering him the dinner rolls he particularly liked. Jordan clapped me on the shoulder in passing, oblivious to the tension radiating off me, and made some joke about Sunday drivers. And Owen sat on those stairs watching his cousin get warmly welcomed, and served dinner after arriving nearly an hour late, while he remained exiled for being 5 minutes late. I saw Owen's face crumple, saw him understand in real time that the rules were different for him, that he was valued less, that his presence at the family table was contingent in a way Ethan's wasn't. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. I stood up from the dinner table, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, and said I needed a word with Gerald and Donna in private. Gerald looked annoyed at the interruption, but Melissa shot me a warning look, and they followed me into the study. I closed the door and asked as calmly as I could manage how they could justify punishing Owen for being 5 minutes late, while welcoming Jordan and Ethan with open arms after showing up almost an hour late. Gerald said the situations were different, that Jordan had a much longer drive and traffic was unpredictable. I said we'd had an unpredictable soccer game and had communicated we'd be slightly late. Donna said we should have left the game early to be on time if punctuality was so important. I said Owen's team was in overtime and he'd scored the winning goal, that we'd gotten here as fast as we could. Gerald said that was our choice, and choices have consequences, and the consequence was Owen missing dinner. I asked if the same consequence would apply to Ethan when he showed up late, and the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Gerald finally said that wasn't the same thing because Ethan hadn't been late, Jordan had, and they couldn't punish a child for his parents' driving choices. I said they'd literally just punished Owen for his parents' choice to stay at his soccer game. Donna said I was being argumentative and twisting things, that they'd raised 3 children and didn't need parenting advice from me. I felt my jaw clench and said I wasn't giving parenting advice. I was pointing out blatant favoritism. Gerald's face went red, and he said there was no favoritism. They loved both boys equally, and I was being disrespectful in their home. I said respecting their home didn't mean accepting them, treating my son like a second-class grandchild. Melissa appeared in the doorway then, looking panicked, and said, we should all just calm down and have a nice dinner. I said I wasn't having dinner. I was taking Owen home, and she could stay if she wanted, but I was done watching my son be treated like he didn't matter. The drive home was quiet. Owen asked if he'd done something wrong, and I told him no. He'd done nothing wrong. That sometimes adults made unfair decisions, and I was sorry he'd been caught in the middle. Melissa texted me 8 times during the drive, each message more frantic than the last, saying I'd embarrassed her, that I'd overreacted, that her parents were deeply hurt by my accusations. I didn't respond, just focused on getting Owen home and fed. When we walked in the door, I made him his favorite dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, and we sat at our kitchen table, just the two of us. He told me about scoring the winning goal, his face lighting up with the memory, and I felt rage building that this achievement had been completely overshadowed by my in-laws' petty punishment. Melissa came home around 9:30 after Owen was in bed. She was upset, had been crying, and said I'd ruined the family dinner with my tantrum. I said I hadn't thrown a tantrum. I'd objected to our son being punished disproportionately while Ethan got special treatment. She said I'd humiliated her in front of her family, that I'd made everything about me when it was just about teaching Owen about punctuality. I pulled out my phone and showed her the notes I'd been keeping, the documented incidents spanning 3 years of differential treatment. She stared at the screen, scrolling through dates and descriptions, her expression shifting from defensive to uncertain. I showed her the anniversary photos where Owen had been moved to the edge. I showed her videos from Christmas where Gerald and Donna fawned over Ethan's presents while barely acknowledging Owen's. I showed her receipts proving the value difference in birthday gifts, Ethan receiving items worth 2 or 3 times what Owen got. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Melissa was quiet for a long time. Then she said maybe her parents did favor Ethan a little, but that was natural because Jordan was their son, and I was only family by marriage, so of course they'd be closer to Jordan's child. The logic was so twisted and hurtful, I actually laughed. I said Owen was their grandchild, blood-related through their daughter, just as much their family as Ethan. Melissa said I knew what she meant, that the relationship was different. I asked how it was different, and she couldn't articulate it. Just kept saying I didn't understand the family dynamics, that I was an outsider trying to change how they'd always operated. That word, outsider, after 12 years of marriage, after planning every single family event for 6 years, after dedicating hundreds of hours to making their celebrations perfect, that word broke something fundamental. I told Melissa I was done planning family events. She looked confused, like the statement didn't compute. I explained slowly and clearly that for 6 years I'd coordinated every birthday, every holiday, every anniversary celebration for her family. I'd booked venues, hired caterers, managed budgets, tracked RSVPs, arranged travel, bought gifts, created schedules, handled logistics. I'd done it for free. Done it because I thought it made me part of the family. Done it because I wanted to contribute. But if I was an outsider, if my son was less valued than Jordan's, then they could plan their own events going forward. Melissa said I was being petty, that punishing the whole family because I was mad at her parents was childish. I said I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply withdrawing unpaid labor from people who didn't value me or my child. She said her parents would be devastated. I said they should have thought of that before treating Owen like he didn't matter. The next family event on the calendar was Donna's 65th birthday party, scheduled for 3 weeks out. I'd started planning it 2 months prior, had already booked a venue, a beautiful garden restaurant with a private room, had coordinated with a bakery for a custom cake, had created a guest list of 42 people, and sent save-the-date notices. The full invitations were designed and ready to send, the menu was selected pending final confirmation, I had a photographer on hold, and a playlist curated. Withdrawing from the planning meant all of that would collapse. I pulled up the event folder on my laptop and showed Melissa the scope of work I'd already done and what still needed to happen over the next 3 weeks. Her face went pale as she realized how much was involved, how many moving pieces required coordination. She asked if I was seriously going to cancel her mother's birthday party over a disagreement about Owen. I said I wasn't canceling anything, I just wasn't planning it anymore, and someone else could take over the work. She said no one else knew how to do all this. I said then they'd learn, or they'd have a simpler party, or they'd hire a professional event planner, which is what they should have done years ago, instead of expecting me to do it for free. Melissa started crying, said this was cruel, that her mother would be heartbroken if the party fell apart. I felt a flicker of guilt, but pushed it down and said her mother had been heartbroken enough to ban our son from dinner for 5 minutes, so maybe she'd survive some disappointment about her birthday party. Over the next week, Melissa tried multiple approaches to change my mind. She apologized for calling me an outsider, said she'd been upset and hadn't meant it. She promised to talk to her parents about treating Owen more fairly. She offered to take over the event planning herself, though we both knew she didn't have the time or organizational skills. She suggested we go to family therapy to work through the issues. I agreed to therapy but held firm on not planning any more family events. The boundary felt necessary, felt like the only power I had to demonstrate that my time and effort had value, that I wouldn't continue contributing to a family system that treated my son as lesser. Gerald called me 4 days after the Sunday dinner incident. His tone was conciliatory but condescending, the way you might talk to a child having an unreasonable tantrum. He said Melissa had told him I was upset about Owen's punishment, that perhaps they'd been too harsh, and they were willing to forget the whole thing if I'd stopped being dramatic. I asked if they were willing to apologize to Owen. He said Owen was 9 years old and wouldn't remember this in a week. I said I'd remember it, and more importantly, I'd documented 3 years of similar incidents that formed a clear pattern of favoritism. Gerald's tone shifted, became defensive, and he said I was keeping files on them like some kind of creep. I said I was documenting the treatment of my son because people tend to deny patterns when confronted without proof. He said if I had such a problem with their family, maybe I shouldn't participate in family events anymore. I said that was fine with me, and by the way, I wouldn't be planning any more of those events either. There was a long silence. Then Gerald said, I couldn't just abandon Donna's birthday party 3 weeks before the date. I said, watch me, and hung up. Donna called the next day, her approach more emotional than Gerald's. She cried and said she didn't understand why I was doing this, that she loved Owen just as much as Ethan, that I was breaking her heart by pulling away from the family. I asked if she'd apologize to Owen for banishing him from dinner. She said she would if it meant that much to me, though she still felt he needed to learn about punctuality. I said a sincere apology didn't come with qualifications, and if she couldn't see why punishing him for 5 minutes while welcoming Ethan after an hour was wrong, then we had nothing more to discuss. She said I was being stubborn and hurtful, that family was supposed to forgive and move on. I said family was also supposed to treat children equally and protect them from favoritism, and when they started doing that, I'd consider planning events again. She hung up on me. 2 weeks before Donna's birthday, Melissa reported that the party planning was in chaos. Christina had reluctantly agreed to take over, but was overwhelmed and didn't know where to start. The venue had called asking for final menu selections and headcount confirmation. The bakery needed cake details. The photographer needed a deposit. Invitations hadn't been sent. Melissa begged me to at least send her my files so Christina could work from my foundation. I said no. Those files represented hundreds of hours of my unpaid work, and I wasn't handing over my labor to people who'd made clear I was an outsider. Melissa said I was letting pride destroy her mother's birthday. I said her mother had let favoritism destroy Sunday dinners, and this was the consequence. The breaking point came 11 days before the party when Gerald showed up at my workplace. I was in a meeting when my assistant told me my father-in-law was in the lobby demanding to see me. I excused myself and found Gerald in the reception area, his face red and agitated. He said we needed to talk immediately. I led him to a conference room and closed the door. He said the birthday party was falling apart, that Christina was in over her head, that the family was upset, and this had gone far enough. I said I agreed it had gone far enough, which is why I'd stopped participating. Gerald said I was being vindictive and petty, punishing Donna for something minor. I said treating my son like he was less valuable than his cousin wasn't minor, it was fundamental. Gerald's tone shifted from conciliatory to threatening. He said if I didn't resume planning the party, he'd make sure Melissa understood what kind of man she'd married, that he'd convince her I was unstable and controlling. I felt my hands ball into fists and asked if he was seriously threatening to sabotage my marriage because I wouldn't plan his wife's birthday party. He said he was protecting his daughter from a man who was tearing the family apart over nothing. I said the family was being torn apart by his favoritism, and I'd documented enough evidence to prove it to anyone who cared to look. Gerald said no one would believe me, that I was paranoid and obsessive. I pulled out my phone, opened the documentation, and offered to show him. He glanced at the screen, saw the detailed notes and photos, and his expression changed from confident to uncertain. I told Gerald he could leave my workplace immediately, or I'd call security. He said this wasn't over, that he'd make me regret treating his family this way. I said I wasn't treating his family anyway. I was simply stopping my unpaid labor, and if that collapsed their events, then maybe they'd appreciate what I'd been contributing all these years. He left, but not before saying Melissa deserved better than me. I sat in the conference room for 10 minutes after he left, trying to control the shaking in my hands before returning to my meeting. That evening, I told Melissa about Gerald showing up at my work. She was horrified, said her father had overstepped, but also said I had to understand how stressed everyone was about the party falling apart. I said the party wouldn't have fallen apart if they'd valued my contributions enough to not treat my son like garbage. Melissa said I was holding the party hostage, using it as leverage. I said I wasn't using it for anything. I'd simply stopped working on it. And apparently, it couldn't function without me, which proved exactly how much they'd been taking me for granted. She asked what I wanted from her. I said I wanted her parents to genuinely apologize to Owen, to acknowledge the pattern of favoritism, and to commit to treating both boys equally going forward. She said her parents would never admit to favoritism. I said then we had a problem, because I wouldn't continue participating in a family system that diminished my child. Melissa suggested we see a family therapist together. I agreed, and we got an appointment with Dr. Raymond Fletcher, a psychologist with 26 years of experience in family systems and intergenerational conflict. Our first session was 3 days before Donna's birthday. Dr. Fletcher listened to both of our perspectives, reviewed some of the documentation I'd brought, and asked clarifying questions. When Melissa explained that I was refusing to plan family events as punishment for a disagreement, Dr. Fletcher asked if I'd been compensated for the event planning work. Melissa looked confused and said no, I'd volunteered. Dr. Fletcher asked how many events I'd planned. I said approximately 30 over 6 years. He asked if I tracked the hours. I had, roughly, in time logs for major events. The total was over 800 hours. Dr. Fletcher asked what that would cost if they'd hired a professional event planner. I'd looked this up, and in our area, professional planners charged between $50 and $90 per hour, depending on event complexity. Dr. Fletcher did the math out loud. Even at the low end, 800 hours at $50 per hour was $40,000 worth of unpaid labor. The number hung in the air. Melissa had gone pale. Dr. Fletcher said that when someone provides that level of uncompensated service to a family, and then withdraws it, calling that punishment or hostage-taking was inaccurate. It was boundary setting around unpaid labor. He asked Melissa if she'd expect me to continue working for free at my actual job if my employer treated our son poorly. She said no, that would be different. Dr. Fletcher asked how it was different. She couldn't articulate an answer. He said family relationships often involved implicit expectations of labor, particularly around event planning and emotional work, and those expectations became problematic when the labor was taken for granted or when the laborer's family members were treated poorly. He recommended we examine the overall family dynamic. The favoritism issue Melissa had admitted existed at least somewhat, and the question of whether continuing intensive involvement with her parents was healthy for our marriage and our son. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. We left that session with homework. Melissa was to talk to her parents about their treatment of Owen using specific examples, and I was to consider what conditions would need to exist for me to resume any relationship with them, let alone event planning. Melissa attempted the conversation with her parents 2 days before the birthday party. It went badly. According to Melissa, Gerald and Donna denied any favoritism, said I'd poisoned her against them, and accused her of choosing her husband over her family. When she brought up the Sunday dinner incident, they said they'd already offered to apologize to Owen, but I'd rejected it because I was unreasonable. When she mentioned the anniversary photos, they said that was years ago and I was holding grudges. When she showed them some of my documentation, they said I was unstable to be keeping such detailed records. The conversation ended with Donna in tears and Gerald telling Melissa she needed to get her husband under control. The birthday party happened without me. I don't know the full details because I wasn't there, and Melissa didn't share much, but apparently it was scaled down significantly, held at the house rather than the reserved venue which they'd lost the deposit on by canceling so late, catered with grocery store trays instead of the planned menu, no professional photographer, a simple sheet cake instead of the custom design I'd ordered. The guest list was smaller because many people never received invitations, or received them too late to attend. Melissa said her mother put on a brave face but was clearly disappointed, and the family consensus was that I'd ruined her 65th birthday out of spite. I asked Melissa if anyone at the party acknowledged that the reason it fell apart was because they'd lost the person who'd been planning all their events for free. She said Christina had mentioned how much work went into event planning, and she didn't know how I'd managed so many. I asked if Gerald or Donna acknowledged that. She said no, they blamed me for abandoning them. The lack of accountability was almost impressive in its completeness. They'd reaped the benefits of my labor for years, treated my son poorly, dismissed my concerns, and when I stopped working for them, they framed me as the villain for withdrawing what they'd never appreciated. 2 weeks after the birthday party, Dr. Fletcher had a session scheduled with just me. He asked how I was processing everything. I said I felt vindicated that the party collapse had proven my contributions had value, but also conflicted because I genuinely enjoyed event planning, and now that creative outlet was gone. He asked if I missed the family gatherings. I said I missed the idea of them, the Norman Rockwell fantasy of big happy family dinners, but the reality had never matched that fantasy. He said it sounded like I'd been tolerating dysfunction in pursuit of an idealized version of family that didn't exist. I said that was probably accurate. He asked what I wanted going forward. I said I wanted my son to grow up feeling valued and important, and if that meant distancing from grandparents who made him feel lesser, then that was the choice I'd make. Dr. Fletcher said that was a valid choice, but asked if I'd considered trying to repair the relationship with clear boundaries rather than cutting contact entirely. I said I didn't think repair was possible without genuine acknowledgement from Gerald and Donna, and they'd shown no capacity for that. He suggested a family session with me, Melissa, and her parents, facilitated by him, where the favoritism could be addressed directly with a professional mediator. I was skeptical, but agreed to try. Melissa passed the invitation to her parents. Gerald refused immediately, said he wouldn't be lectured by a therapist based on my paranoid documentation. Donna said she'd consider it, but only if I apologized first for ruining her birthday. I laughed when Melissa told me that, genuinely laughed, because the audacity was remarkable. Over the following months, several smaller family events came and went without me planning them. Jordan and Christina's anniversary, Ethan's birthday, Thanksgiving. Each one was noticeably less organized than what the family had become accustomed to. People started commenting to Melissa about how different events felt now, how they missed the attention to detail and smooth logistics. Several relatives reached out to me directly, asking if I'd consider planning future events, apparently not understanding that I'd stopped because of how Owen was treated, not just randomly decided to quit. I explained to those who asked that I'd been planning events under the assumption I was valued family, but the treatment of Owen had shown that assumption was wrong. Some understood, some thought I was overreacting, but I held firm. The real consequence came at Christmas. Christmas had always been a massive production, 40-plus relatives gathering at a rented venue, catered dinner, gift exchange, activities for kids, the whole elaborate affair. I'd planned the previous 6 Christmases and each one had been lauded as wonderful and special. This year, with no one coordinating, the plan kept changing. First, it was going to be at Gerald and Donna's house. Then the house was too small. Then someone suggested a restaurant, but no one booked it in time. Then it moved to Jordan and Christina's house, but they didn't have space either. The gift exchange was confused, with different family branches following different dollar limits or no limits. The food was potluck with no coordination, so there were 5 desserts and no vegetables. Children's activities weren't planned, so the kids were bored and disruptive. The whole thing was, by multiple accounts, a disaster. Melissa came home from that Christmas gathering looking defeated. She said it had been awful, that everyone had been talking about how different and disappointing it was, that multiple relatives had asked where I was, and when told I'd chosen not to attend, had commented that it made sense the event was a mess without me organizing it. I asked if Gerald and Donna had acknowledged any connection between their treatment of Owen and my absence. Melissa said no. They maintained I was being petty and vindictive. I said then nothing had changed, and nothing would change. She asked how long I was going to keep punishing the family. I said I wasn't punishing anyone. I'd simply stopped providing free labor to people who didn't value me or my son. She said the whole family was suffering. I said that wasn't my responsibility, and if they wanted well-planned events, they could hire a professional or appreciate me enough to treat Owen fairly. In January, Melissa told me her mother wanted to talk. I was skeptical, but agreed to a phone call. Donna's tone was conciliatory but still didn't include accountability. She said the holidays had been difficult, that everyone missed the way events used to be, and she hoped we could move past our disagreement. I said we could move past it if she'd acknowledge the favoritism and apologize to Owen genuinely. She said she'd already tried to apologize, but I'd rejected it. I said an apology with qualifications attached wasn't a real apology. She asked what I wanted her to say. I said I wanted her to tell Owen she was wrong to punish him for being 5 minutes late while welcoming Ethan after an hour, that she recognized she'd been treating him differently than his cousin, and that she'd work to change that. Donna was quiet for a long time. Then she said she'd think about it. 3 days later, Donna showed up at our house with Gerald. They asked to speak with Owen. Melissa was suspicious, asked what they wanted to say, but they insisted on talking to him directly. Owen came downstairs, wary but polite, and Gerald and Donna sat him down in our living room. Donna said they owed him an apology, that they'd been unfair about the Sunday dinner situation, that it wasn't right to punish him for being a few minutes late when other people arrived much later without consequences. She said they'd been doing some thinking about how they treated him compared to his cousin, and they wanted to do better. It wasn't the full acknowledgement I'd hoped for, didn't include admitting to years of favoritism, but it was more than I'd expected. Owen accepted the apology with grace, said it was okay, and they hugged him. After Owen went back upstairs, Gerald turned to me and said the family missed my event planning, that it was clear no one else could do it the way I did, and he hoped I'd reconsider. I said I appreciated the apology to Owen, but I needed to see sustained change in how they treated him before I'd consider planning events again. Gerald said that was fair, that they'd work on it. Donna asked if I'd at least consult on her upcoming anniversary party, even if I didn't plan it fully. I said I'd think about it. They left, and Melissa hugged me, said it was progress, that maybe things could improve. The improvement was gradual and imperfect. Over the next several months, Gerald and Donna made visible efforts to treat Owen more equitably. They asked about his activities and achievements. They gave him attention during family gatherings. They stopped with the obviously differential treatment. But old habits died hard, and there were still moments where the favoritism slipped through, where Ethan got praised excessively for something Owen had done better, where different standards applied. Each time I documented it and brought it up, and to their credit, Gerald and Donna started acknowledging it when pointed out, rather than denying it. Dr. Fletcher said that was significant progress, that breaking generational patterns took time and consistent effort. I didn't resume full event planning, but I did start consulting. For Gerald and Donna's anniversary party, I provided my vendor contacts and a basic timeline template to whoever was doing the actual planning. The event was better than recent disasters, but still noticeably less polished than what I'd produced. People commented on the difference. I felt a vindictive satisfaction knowing my contributions had been more valuable than they'd recognized, but also sadness that my creative outlet had been poisoned by the family dynamics. Dr. Fletcher worked with us on establishing boundaries. I didn't have to plan events to be part of the family. I didn't have to tolerate favoritism in exchange for belonging. I could contribute when and how I chose, and withdraw that contribution when my boundaries were violated. Melissa came to understand that asking me to just overlook the treatment of Owen to keep peace was asking me to fail as a father. She started backing me up more consistently when her parents slipped into old patterns. Owen, for his part, seemed lighter after the apology. The Sunday dinner incident had affected him more than I'd initially realized, had confirmed fears he'd been developing that he wasn't as loved as Ethan. The direct apology and the subsequent efforts to treat him better helped repair some of that damage. He still noticed the differential treatment when it occurred, was more attuned to it now, but he also saw me advocating for him, which taught him his worth wasn't determined by how others treated him. The family system recalibrated around my withdrawal from event planning. People started recognizing it as actual work that required time, skill, and effort rather than something that just magically happened. Some relatives started chipping in to hire professional planners for major events, which honestly produced better results than the recent attempts by family members who lacked experience. The quality gap between professional planners and my volunteer work was minimal, which validated that I'd been providing a professional-level service for free. Jordan actually apologized to me about 6 months after the initial crisis. He said he'd been oblivious to the favoritism, had just assumed all grandparents favored their sons' children over daughters. and hadn't thought about how that affected Owen. He said watching his parents try to change their behavior had made him realize how significant the differential treatment had been. He said he'd talked to Ethan about being more aware of the dynamics. I appreciated the effort, even though his assumption that all grandparents favored sons' children was itself problematic, and I told him so. He took the feedback better than I expected. It's been almost 2 years since that Sunday dinner incident. Owen is 11 now, confident and happy, secure in the knowledge that he's valued. The relationship with my in-laws is cordial, but bounded. We attend some family events, skip others, and I plan exactly 0 of them. Gerald and Donna have mostly maintained their efforts to treat Owen fairly, though I remain vigilant and call out backsliding when it happens. Melissa has become my ally rather than my opponent in protecting Owen, which has strengthened our marriage significantly. The most important outcome is that Owen knows he deserves fair treatment, knows his father will advocate for him, knows his worth isn't determined by how others perceive him. That lesson, learned through watching me establish boundaries and refuse to accept unacceptable behavior, is worth more than any perfectly planned family event. Sometimes people ask if I regret my approach, if I wish I'd been less confrontational or more willing to compromise. I don't. The confrontation was necessary to break a pattern that was harming my son. The refusal to continue unpaid labor was necessary to demonstrate value. The documentation was necessary to prove reality against denial, and the sustained boundary holding was necessary to force actual change rather than just surface-level apologies. The family still talks about that chaotic Christmas, about Donna's scaled-down birthday party, about all the events that fell apart without me planning them. Not with blame toward me anymore, but with recognition of what had been lost when they failed to appreciate what they had. That recognition came too late to restore what was, but early enough to build something different and more honest going forward. And that's enough. Owen is safe. He's valued. He knows he matters. That's everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.